You might remember that back in 2017, Hurricane Maria ravaged Puerto Rico, the island of American citizens that is southeast of Florida. We learned at the time that many Republicans didn't know that Puerto Ricans are American citizens. We also knew at the time that Donald Trump didn't really seem to care very much about it. The administration was slow to send the aid that they did send. And we know that when Donald Trump went, he didn't really seem to be taking it super seriously. Remember when he showed up and tossed paper towels into the crowd like he was shooting hoops? We're playing that video now for our television and online video audience. But now we have to think it wasn't merely indifference to Puerto Rico from the Trump administration in 2017 and 2018, that it was actually much worse because of a new report from the Department of HUD, Housing and Urban Development. The Inspector General of the Department of HUD has issued a report that says that because of tension between Department of HUD and the Office of Management and Budget under Trump, all sorts of bogus procedural hurdles were put in place to delay Puerto Rico actually getting the money. Now, some of you will listen to me say this and you'll go up and you'll look at money approved for Puerto Rico and you will say, hold on a second, David. The money was approved. 20 billion was approved for Puerto Rico. And Trump announced it and talked about it. And of course, yes, the money was approved. But the whole point is approving funds doesn't disperse the funds. They are separately processed. And the Office of Management and Budget, which would approve the distribution of the funds, around that time started to require HUD to send grant notices for disaster funds through an interagency review process for approval, which never before had been required, which dramatically slowed everything down. Investigators found that OMB never required such a review for recovery funds before, and it was a requirement created in this particular situation. Former HUD Secretary Ben Carson would be a perfect guy to ask about all of this. He declined to be interviewed by investigators. Access to HUD information was delayed or denied multiple times throughout the course of the investigation. And the Trump administration's OMB also insisted on completely overhauling Puerto Rico's property management records, suspension of its minimum wage on federal contracts, and a whole other bunch of prerequisites. Imagine saying, we're approving 20 billion for you, but to get it, you have to remove the minimum wage provision on federal contracts. What? And some HUD officials realistically and rightly worried that the requirements were, number one, designed to make it impossible for the money to actually be distributed, and even potentially beyond HUD's ability to actually do. Two top HUD officials admitted knowing that they were on purpose missing the deadline to issue a notice that would unlock billions in federal recovery funds to Puerto Rico. They're not even denying it. Or I mean, they didn't at the time. Ben Carson later defended his agency's actions by saying Trump's talking points, which are, we wanted to prevent corruption and irregularities. That's why we needed to do this stuff. Then Ben Carson refused to actually be interviewed by investigators here. So now that we have a bigger picture, not only did the Trump administration allegedly block the much needed aid from getting to Puerto Rico, they also obstructed an investigation looking into why Puerto Rico didn't ultimately get the money. And there's nothing surprising here whatsoever. Last week or the week before, it's hard to keep track of all the scandals. We were talking about another newly uncovered Trump administration scam. And I said, it's not clear we will ever know the full scope of the grift or the scamming that this administration did. Every time we do learn about something new like this, my reaction is, of course they did that. If you look at the public disdain that Trump had for Puerto Rico, and you look at the public indifference that Trump exhibited, none of these revelations is remotely surprising or hard to believe. And then, of course, I mean, we can't really come full circle on the implications of this without mentioning that no matter what comes to light, a huge portion of the 75 million people who voted for Donald Trump in 2020 would take him right back for another 4 years. They would gleefully vote him back in if he runs in 2024. And as we will talk about a little bit later on in the program, The vast majority of them still believe that Joe Biden did not legitimately win the 2020 election. But there is no news story. There is no grift or scam or revelation that would change their minds. And that's a major problem for the country. These revelations show the complicit nature, not complicit, the responsibility of the Trump administration in Puerto Rico being a disaster for as long as it was after the hurricane. But as much of a problem as that is, we also have an ongoing problem in that the vast majority of the 75 million people that voted for the guy would vote for him again. And we're going to talk about that poll a little bit later today.